Do you believe in the air bear? And speaking of air, don't overreact to windy conditions this week. We'll tell you which games might be windy and whether you should care or not. This is the Football Guys Daily Fantasy Power Grid presented by DraftKings, and it is week 8. We're going to look at those Vegas lines. John, tell us, what is Vegas telling you this week?
It's all Kansas City. Kansas City at home against the Jets. They have the highest implied team total in the season at 34.3 points. There's going to be a lot of attention on that Kansas City run game. They are 20-point favorites. I'm going to agree with you, Devin, but put down the red so you quit distracting me. Kansas City is a big favorite this week. We're going to talk about that game. There's a lot of goodness to be had on the Kansas City offense. We'll talk about exactly how to handle that. After that, it actually is kind of an interesting week. It kind of drops down in terms of the Vegas totals. For the most part this year, we've had 55, 56, 57. And it's not to say that we don't have games like that. Certainly, Tennessee is visiting Cincinnati. That's 53.5. Minnesota at Green Bay, 51. That game actually shot out already this season. And San Francisco at Seattle in the NFC West, right? And so that's 54 points. So there's quite a few games, but I actually think this is a week where I'm not so sure there's going to be a lot of shootouts. And so selection of these games is going to be really interesting. I have one that I got my eye on that's kind of lower that I think could overshoot. And I think there's one also that I haven't mentioned that could probably go under. So really interesting, especially when we're talking about GPPs in terms of how to approach these games in Vegas with regards to fantasy output. So I'll stop there and we can talk about positions and how to approach the slates in week 8.
And we've seen some of these Vegas numbers come down a little bit since they originally opened earlier in the week. We record on Thursday nights, so we're using those numbers, but they've moved around quite a bit. Devin, right out the gate, you had the red black-eyed Joe flashed up on this Kansas City game. Was that just because you had to, do that because it was the first mention of the night, or is there some quarterback that we can transition to that's related to your dislike of that game?
Friends don't let friends play players against the Jets.
Oh,
I think we've talked about that the last couple of weeks. But this game is just going to be it's going to be 35-0, maybe 21-0. We're going to see Chad Henne. We're going to see Le'Veon Bell. We're going to see Clyde Edwards-Helaire. We're going to see whoever the backup tight end is. Like, you want to play these? Sammy Watkins may have a huge game. Who the hell knows? But
he may still be out. Don't play Sammy Watkins.
Yeah. Anyway. He's going to play in this game on crutches. That's how bad the Jets are. I'm not going with the Mahomes. I just don't think the upside is there. They're not going to be throwing the ball nearly as much as they otherwise should be. Is it safe to just go with Russell Wilson at this point? Like, against San Francisco? I know the matchup's tough, but I anticipate that this game... John's talking about sneaky shootouts. I anticipate that this game could be one of those, and that both Garoppolo and Russell Wilson are in play in this one. Going down the list, I think that it's not clear cut, but Joe Burrow against Tennessee. So Tennessee's pass defense, they're allowing the seventh most yards per game, and they've allowed 15 passing touchdowns. This could be a sneaky game going back and forth as well. And Burrow, has he been the most efficient quarterback? No. But, he's thrown for 406 yards and then 313 yards in his last 2 games. So, and he ran a little bit more last week. So, in closer games, I think you'll still see him run. Maybe it's just against Cleveland, but I anticipate that he will move around a little bit. And then I want to go Tua, but I'm not going to. So I think
who's your cash game quarterback
right now? Joe Burrow.
It seemed like Phil had some concerns about Joe Burrow. Does it have anything to do with the fact that 3 of his offensive linemen didn't practice on Thursday?
Yeah, you got it, Austin. I am scared for Joe Burrow's well-being. I mean, that was already the worst offensive line in football or thereabouts. And now you're going to have a backup center, which is always disruptive, for an offense when a new center comes in. And then he's down two tackles, Jonah Williams and whoever the other guy is. And that's kind of my point, is that whoever the other guy is, whoever the guy behind him is going to be playing in this game.
But the
And
replacement
that,
value between the two, I mean, it's not that big of a drop off if they're terrible.
fair enough, but I do have to wonder about Hopkins, their center, and Jonah Williams, who at least was a high draft pick, even though he hasn't really been great either. I mean, if he makes it through the game, I feel like like DraftKings ought to like give you triple the crowns or something like that. Like he's going to get hurt.
Well, and he is priced nicer on DraftKings than FanDuel. If you're going to play him, I don't know that I would look to play Joe Burrow over on FanDuel. Who do you like, Phil?
So I would like in an ideal world, I would pay up to Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers. I think it's going to be hard this week, and I would rather bring it down a little bit in cash games. Devin mentioned Jimmy Garoppolo. I think he could hit value against the Seahawks. And how about the team that Burrow had that career game against last week? How about Las Vegas and Derek Carr at 5,500, right above Jimmy Garoppolo? This is a different Derek Carr than we've seen probably since that 1 year where everybody was talking about him as an MVP candidate. He's kind of right now playing better than he was even then. He's got a 72% completion rate. That's a career high, 288 yards per game, at least 20
Don't play Jimmy Garoppolo,
each of his
please.
last three. His adjusted yards per attempt is at 9, which is like Patrick Mahomes, Aguilar, a career bum. And the Browns are bottom 4 in fantasy points per game allowed to opposing quarterbacks. The total has come down, as Austin mentioned, but Vegas opened it at 55.5. So that's a big total. And I don't see what's stopping Derek Carr from at least another 20, 25 points in this one.
John, what do you think about quarterbacks this week?
Well, I mean, even though you didn't hear everything that Phil said, or at least I didn't hear everything that he said, I think he was spot on with his last two quarterbacks. Garoppolo and Carr are definitely at the top of my list for DraftKings cash games, $5,500 and $5,400. That's the way I want to go this week. I'm not spending up to $8K on names like Russell Wilson. I just don't think that you need to. This is I always say this: if you can spend down at this position, this is where you're going to spend down. So no issues with either of those quarterbacks for cash games. For GPPs, there's a couple guys I'm looking at. I do think, we're going to talk about this Kansas City game some more. Mahomes actually isn't on my list for cash games, but I'm thinking about just responding to Devin's commentary. I agree with him in the sense that Chad Henne may be in the game in the fourth quarter. But if that happens, that means that Mahomes and the starters will have scored 30 points. And if they do, that means that they will have gotten the fantasy points that you were kind of going after. So no issues with the Chiefs. The question is whether you want to go with the running game or the passing game. It's 20-point favorites. We typically just lock in on those running backs, right? So looking at CEH, we're looking at Le'Veon Bell. And the question is whether or not that's the right move. I'm not so sure that it is this week, and that's what I was getting at with Devin at the top of the show. Outside of him, another expensive quarterback that I like, and this is the game that I think has potential sneaky shootout, is Pittsburgh and Baltimore. Two really good offenses. And the total in Vegas is only 46.5. I know they have good defenses, but I think we're seeing a difference. There's no crowd in the stadium to kind of shut down these quarterbacks. I think this game goes over, and I think it goes over by a good margin. I think these are two very good offenses We saw last week, Pittsburgh, Tennessee kind of went back and forth. Baltimore can do their thing. I like Lamar Jackson this week at 7,400 against Pittsburgh for this to go back and forth. I think this is, and he's not going to be on a lot of rosters. I don't know, Devin, put you on the spot. I'm not even sure it's live yet, but do you have any prelim numbers on Lamar Jackson in terms of his percent rostered this week?
Right now it's like 5%, 6%.
Yeah, so if it goes that low, I'm more than happy to go overweight on him. I've got him about twice as likely to meet GPP value even at that kind of exorbitant salary. Outside of that, I think Josh Allen is still interesting against New England's. They have a nice an implied team total that's not super high at 22. But he's a guy that I'm still interested in because I think he's going to be on fewer rosters than his upside merits.
Devin, can we talk about Jimmy Garoppolo real quick?
Sure.
Is he really a cash game play when he's throwing for 24 times a game? I mean, really, the guy hasn't thrown over 300 yards in over a year.
How many points are the Seahawks going to put up this week?
It depends. I mean, 21 to 28, something like that.
I like him for closer to 35, but I think that.
You think Seattle's going to score 35?
Yes.
Then bet the over and don't play. I mean,
so that's why I think that Carr is a much better play than Garoppolo because you're not going to see that possibility doesn't exist with Carr that he only throws 20 times.
Yeah, I just never. I mean, I have a rule that I never play Garoppolo in cash because his ceiling just never is high enough. He doesn't run. He doesn't hit 300 yards. He doesn't throw 3 touchdowns. So like you're paying for a floor that just like I can get a floor out of basically any quarterback.
And I agree with you, Devin, but just to double check here, does it change his game plan at all with Jeff Wilson out and on IR and Tevin Coleman probably not ready for this game since he's just coming off of IR? Do you think they pass more in this game or they're just like next man up?
I mean, they could, and that makes him at least a sneaky, or I don't even know if it's sneaky, but at least in GPP consideration. I just don't know that. I like Derek Carr a lot. I think that he has 400 yards and 3 to 4 touchdown upside. I think far too often people look at a floor for cash game quarterbacks, and really this year it's turned in that you need the 1 or 2 quarterbacks who are just going to go off.
Yeah, and Devin, I haven't heard you mention Justin Herbert's name yet. I mean, he is the Air Bear.
Not this week.
Not this week?
Not this week. Tough matchup. Going to Denver.
I thought he was an every week guy.
No.
Okay.
We're not going to overuse the Air Bear and wear it out. So
okay. All right.
It's special occasions. I'm not going to toot my own horn, but yeah.
Gotcha. All right.
I hope some of you listened out there last week. He was special, man.
He
looks good. He's a good quarterback. I will give you that. Although I'm not sure he won any tournaments last week.
With Baker Mayfield going off the way he did, and
I mean there were Kyler Murray, Russ Wilson. Those guys were the ones who won tournaments last week. But it was a good call. I'm not taking anything away from Devin on this one.
Yep. All right, let's move to running backs. Please leave us some comments in the YouTube comments down below. We would love to chat with you, answer your questions, respond to your gripes, even if they have to do with weird things like the way our light switches are positioned behind us. Let's talk running backs. I'm going to go to you first, Phil. The injuries we're looking at here are, it looks like Dalvin Cook is returning this week, likely to return this week. He got a limited practice in on Thursday. Looks like Chris Carson is a no-go this week. And then, as I mentioned before, Jeff Wilson is out. And we're keeping an eye on Philip Lindsay a little bit. He did not practice on Thursday due to a concussion. This could be Melvin Gordon narrative week, revenge game against his former team. That's all I got. Phil.
Chris Carson's out, right?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Chris Carson's out. Pete Carroll was like, oh, he's a game time decision. But like everybody else is like, no, there's no way that he's playing this week. So pretty sure he's going to be out. Phil, who do you like at running back?
The same guy for cash games that I gave you last week, Kareem Hunt at 6,900 on DraftKings. In comparison to the other high-priced running backs like Henry and Dalvin Cook, who's coming back this week, Alvin Kamara, Hunt is relatively affordable. His production last week was somewhat modest. It wasn't quite the ceiling game that I was expecting. I think he got to 100 total yards, 20 touches, and a touchdown. But the role is continuing to grow. The guy is a bona fide bell cow at this point. Last week, he was in on 90% of the snaps, handled 95% of the running back touches. There just aren't many running backs doing it. So it looks like the rib and thigh injuries he was dealing with are in the past. And he gets the Raiders, who allow over 30% more DraftKings points than the league average to running backs this season. So the matchup is there. The game script is there. I think it's a big week for Kareem Hunt. I think he could crash through a 30-point ceiling. And then I've got a couple of guys quick for GPPs. I am also going back to Jonathan Taylor, who I think is going to be probably moderately rostered, but
I knew Devin was not going to like this pick. He always hates this pick.
Yeah, but I'm willing to go back to the well here. I think this is the week that the training wheels are finally going to come off. We saw something similar happen after Detroit's bye week with DeAndre Swift, where they came out of the bye and the rookie was integrated more into the offense. Following along with the beat reporters this week in Indianapolis, everybody's talking about how much better Taylor has been than Hines or Wilkins, and they're kind of calling for him to get more run. The coaches are talking him up. I think this is the week that he really gets on track, and he's up against Detroit's defense, which is ranked 23rd in rush defense DVOA. And then I'll give you one more, and that'll be the end for me. I think Jerick McKinnon is a really interesting leverage play in GPPs. So not only is he a price pivot off of Gio Bernard at 5,800, who I think is going to be popular once Joe Mixon scratches, but he's also leverage on Garoppolo, Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle. I think all of these 49ers players are going to come in with higher roster percentages than McKinnon. The crowd's going to be off of him because he barely got in the game and he scored negative DraftKings points last week. That's not good. But we found out that it was a planned rest. And what I was looking at is earlier this year when Deebo Samuel was either out or in the first game that he was back where he played limited snaps, McKinnon ranked as the number 12 running backs on DraftKings scoring. And this week they have him priced at running back 19. He saw a 13% share of the targets. I think if you give him 15 touches, given what we've seen from him on explosive plays, red zone carries, I think he'll be just fine. I think he has multi-touchdown upside and a big play ceiling.
John, what do you think about running backs this week? You also think Kareem Hunt is a cash play?
I sure do. I think he's an excellent cash game play at a sub 7K salary. I think the other one you can consider, I'm not so sure about tournaments, but Alvin Kamara on DK makes a lot of sense. Since week one, he's averaged 8 catches per game. When you were talking about full PPR scoring, he's in play. I'm a little worried about the pace of that game with regards to how back and forth it's going to go. So I'm not so sure he has the upside, but I think the floor is there against Chicago. I'm not too worried about that defense. And then the other running back that I like is Josh Jacobs going up against the Browns at 6,200. I think he makes a lot of sense this week. I'm looking for something to talk about DVOA on my notes. Okay, because I know I want to piss off Devin because I've already seen him roll his eyes at a comment that Phil made a second ago. So I'm moving over to the GPP side. Speaking of Green Bay, Aaron Jones going up against Minnesota at 7,300. He's going up against a 20th DVOA defense. I think that he's very interesting this week. It'll be interesting to see how widely rostered he is going up against a defense that I don't think can shut him down And I'll stop there. I've got a few other guys on my list, but I know that Devin has been very patient, and it's unusual for him at this stage in the game to not have interrupted anybody in an entire section. So Devin, I see your face is red. Go ahead, go to it.
Well, before Devin goes, and also just to piss him off, I don't know that Aaron Jones is going to go this week. Did you just recommend Aaron Jones? Be careful with that. I did. Yeah. I don't know if he's going this week or not. So keep an eye on that. He was not practicing on Thursday due to a calf injury. So we'll see on that.
Yeah, okay. So in fairness, if it's Williams, I'm okay with that as well, especially at his salary. But I still have Jones, at least in my projections. I have him as going this week. And now that I got the floor back, the Seattle running backs are interesting this week as well. Carlos Hyde hasn't practiced yet. He did not practice Wednesday, did not practice today on Thursday. And obviously we talked about Chris Carson, and Travis Homer is in the same boat. So that could mean DJ Dallas, which on Thursday night, it's always difficult to talk about these kind of weird situations. But if it's Dallas, he's going to become chalk going into the weekend. Go ahead, Devin.
So, couple of things. One, 10 to 12 years from now, Phil's kids are going to be asking him, Daddy, why can't we go to college? And he'll be like, that Jonathan Taylor in 2020. That's one. Two, I like the idea of Kareem Hunt. I don't know that I love the production. For cash games, he just hasn't really been there yet. I'm sort of on the fence there. He's in my top 5 for cash game plays, but I'm not sure that I think he's a must play this week. The must play guy for me is Derrick Henry. So Derrick Henry has 7 touchdowns in his last 4 games. He's facing a Cincinnati defense that's allowing 134 rushing yards per game, and he's a guy who he's going to get 20 plus touches in this game. He's averaging just under 24 carries. I think if you look at who is the safest running back on this list, it's Derrick Henry. Now, the question is, how do we actually build a roster around him? And we'll talk about wide receivers in a minute. But for me, I'm starting with Henry. Hunt and Jacobs is really a tough call. I have Jacobs slightly ahead of Hunt just because the salary relief between the two. I don't think this Cleveland defense is as good as what they're advertised. So their overall stats are solid, but if you look at their actual teams that they've faced, Giovanni Bernard, Jonathan Taylor, Antonio Gibson, J.K. Dobbins was the leading rusher in week 1. So, they allowed 100 yards to James Conner. Ezekiel Elliott's just been terrible all year, and it only had 12 carries for some reason because they fell behind early in that game. But this is a Browns defense that got out to big leads early in games, and I think the weather is a little bit of a concern. I think Las Vegas keeps it close, and I like Jacobs quite a bit. And then Le'Veon Bell, he was about 50-50 with Elaire last week, so I think there's a revenge game that if someone's going to score 2 touchdowns against the Jets, I could see them trying to build morale heading into the second half of the year with Le'Veon Bell.
John, you flashed a lot of yellow, red, black-eyed Joes. The floor is yours.
Yeah, the Le'Veon Bell call. I'm kind of sad you called that, Devin, because that was my kind of sneaky. I really think Le'Veon Bell was in a great spot this week. What is he? He's 4,600 on DraftKings. You're right, Devin. He was about 50-50 until the back end of that game. And that was kind of garbage time, trash time. So it didn't really matter what happened until then. And this is a guy who had 1 week to learn the playbook. He's got an extra week now. And you're right. He's going up against his former teams. There's narrative street here to create. And Clyde Edwards-Helaire is in $2,000 more. Give me all the Bell. The issue is whether or not his percent rostered goes through the roof. And I suspect as the weekend approaches, that's exactly what's going to happen. I wouldn't be surprised if he goes north of 20%, which would really be disappointing because I really want to root for him to kind of shove it in Adam Gase's face in this game. I gave this symbol, which basically means I wanted to talk about something, and that was I didn't disagree or agree with Devin, but a lot of times, I write my article specifically on DraftKings, and Devin is very focused on FanDuel. I think that the way that we look at things a little bit differently because FanDuel is much more touchdown heavy in the sense that it's not full PPR. And when he talked about Derrick Henry and how he wants to play him in cash, I totally get it over there on FanDuel. On DraftKings, he doesn't catch a lot of passes, and so that's why I didn't bring him up. But I think this is kind of as our listeners are kind of either watching or listening on the podcast, they need to be thinking about that. Where am I playing, and how does the scoring system kind of fit into that? And at the end of the day, if you're playing on both sites, it's a good way to diversify your risk and go heavy on Derrick Henry over there on FanDuel, but maybe a little bit lighter. And I don't think he's a bad play on DraftKings for what it's worth. I've got him as the fourth likeliest to reach GPP value, so he's still a good play. But I think he's a much stronger player over on FanDuel.
Phil, you got any more guys you want to mention before we move on?
Nope, I'm good.
Devin, running backs. All right. Please hit that subscribe button, hit the bell so you get notifications whenever we drop a new video. And we appreciate a thumbs up on this video. Thanks for watching. Let's talk about wide receivers. We've got quite a few injuries here. We've got Odell Beckham out with the knee injury. We've got Deebo Samuel out with a hamstring injury. It does not look like Allen Robinson is going to go. He did not practice on Thursday with a concussion. And then John Brown looks like he could be back this week after missing one game. And then Tim Patrick may not go this week. He didn't practice on Thursday. Oh, and Julian Edelman was kind of a surprise out today on Thursday due to some sort of knee procedure. So he's not playing this week. A few other odds and ends, but those were the top ones on my list. John, I'm going to come to you first on receivers. Tell me who you like this week. Is this where you're finding some salary relief?
I do have one person for salary relief. I'll close out with him. I think at the top, if you've got salary to spend, Davante Adams is this year's Michael Thomas. He's 8,800. It's tough to pay that, but if you've got the extra salary, that's the way you go. Minnesota doesn't have an answer for him, and now I'm a little bit afraid because I've seen a red black-eyed Joe from Phil, and I heard him say at the top of the show that he's very prepared this week. So I'm anxious to hear what he has to say to downgrade Davante Adams of all people in this league. Tyler Lockett is on my list for cash games. Keenan Allen, Tyler Lockett, we saw what he did on Sunday night. Keenan Allen has double-digit targets, I think, 3 of the past 4 weeks. AJ Green is 4,500, and he's had double-digit targets 2 of the past 2 weeks. It looks like they're I don't know what's going on there, but he's either getting into football shape or Burrow's getting some sort of rapport. I'm not sure what's going on, but for cash games, if I can get a double-digit target guy for in the 4,000s, especially one of AJ Green's ilk, I'll definitely take it. And then going to that Kansas City game, there are quite a few injured receivers in Jets land. Crowder, we talked about some of these guys. They're not really going. And Mims last week, and I think his second start of the season has a decent amount of action. He's 3,200. So I think that's a way you can go. The ceiling may not be too high, but I think kind of the floor is probably a 3 to 4 catch experience, and you're getting 40 yards there. And at 3,200, I can go that way and load up at other positions. And that's kind of the cash game landscape where I'm looking at on Thursday night. And I'll stop there. I got a few GPP guys, but I'll let the other guys kind of chime in on where they think I went wrong, I guess, starting with Phil.
Well, if you're thinking about playing Jets wide receivers, Brashad Perriman did not practice on Thursday due to a concussion, and Jamison Crowder got in a limited practice on Thursday. He might be back this week after missing a game, so keep an eye on him if you're thinking about Mims in this situation. Phil, you flashed the red black-eyed Joe on Davante Adams. What do you think there?
So I'm not saying that Davante Adams is a bad play. I'm not saying he's not. I'm not saying he's not a cash game play. What I am saying from a tournament standpoint, he is mega chalk. You needed him to have a shot at GPPs last week. I think everyone's really excited to fire him back up. And as I'm looking at it, I feel like that is the clearest path to being able to just very quickly differentiate your lineups. And yeah, the matchup is great. Yes, he could kill it again. But, what if he has 13 targets for 100 yards and he doesn't get in the end zone? The chances of him once again appearing in a first place lineup at that percent rostered and that salary are very slim. So I'm going to say a prayer when I do it. But I am coming in under the field this week on Adams in tournaments. It is not going to be very comfortable, but I think it is the correct game theory play.
Or what percent roster do you think he's going to come in at? That's the question.
Go ahead. I think he's the highest owned player on the entire slate.
Not a chance.
I have him 15 to 20.
Yeah.
He might be the highest owned receiver, but
you guys are going to be surprised.
Henry and Kamara will take a lot of that roster percentage.
Tyler Lockett, you can have it a $1,700 discount in a game that probably has higher potential for shooting out. And how can he not be higher? Coming off of a 3-touchdown game on Monday night in prime time.
Because people know who Davante Adams is and they know who Tyler Lockett is. I mean, you guys got to trust me on this one.
No, I can't trust you on this one.
You
said you were prepared.
I'm
beginning to think maybe you're not.
Oh, boo.
He's going off at 30+%, and he's going to be the highest rostered player on the slate.
So, and for the record, if he goes off at 30%, I am 100% behind you with regards to fading him.
Yeah, you're just not buying that's where he's going to be. Devin, talk to me about some receivers.
Does 20% versus 30% really matter?
Yes, it absolutely does. For GPPs, it absolutely does.
I struggle with that one a little bit, but okay. I'm surprised that you guys haven't said the top play of this week. Rashard Higgins, 4,100. He had 6 catches, 110 yards last week. He's the number 1 receiver in Cleveland, going up against the Las Vegas team that really their entire defense has struggled. He's going to see 12 to 15 targets this week. I mean, Scott Miller had 109 yards. Chris Godwin had 88. Tyreek Hill had 78. Stephon Diggs had 115. This Vegas defense is not good. And Landry's not the number 1 in Cleveland. It's Higgins. And at 4,100, he will be in all of my cash games on DraftKings.
John, you gave both the red black-eyed Joe and a nasty scowl at Devin when he said Rashard Higgins. Why is that?
Because he's Rashard Higgins. I mean, what has he done in the NFL? I mean, come on. He's the number 1. He's the number 1 guy in Cleveland. Honestly, I mean, you're a Browns fan. You think that he's going to end up with more targets than Jarvis Landry this week?
Yes, not even a question.
He's the Browns fan.
He is a Browns fan, and I mean, he knows the team better than I do. So I want to be at least respectful of that. Not that Devin ever respects my opinions about.
Let's talk about Baker. Let's talk about Baker Mayfield. Right, he's a 1-read quarterback. Are they really going to have him adjust all of his reads away from Beckham and now towards the slot and Landry? I just don't see any way that they're going to do that.
If you're Baker Mayfield and you know that your job's on the line, are you going to put it in the hands of Rashard Higgins or Jarvis Landry?
He bought himself the rest of the year with that performance last week, and most of it was because of Rashard Higgins. Landry didn't see any uptick once Beckham went out last week. That's the problem.
All right, maybe I'll backtrack a step and say that he's not the best play of the week. That's really where my scowl came from. There are many plays this week, he's not the best play.
I think I said he was the best cheap play. I don't know
No,
that he's the
you
best
didn't.
play. Well,
Somebody rewind it. Somebody rewind it and post it in the comments because I know that Devin reads the comments more than anybody.
fine.
Who else you got, Dev?
I do like Keenan Allen quite a bit. He's probably my favorite receiver.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah. Justin Jefferson's interesting. So Adam Thielen is likely going to see Jair Alexander. And Justin Jefferson's been like one of the highest rated rookies ever. And going up against a Green Bay defense that apparently struggles against DVOA, but hasn't allowed much most of the season. So, and then going down the list a little bit, Deontay Washington maybe against Baltimore, or Deontay Johnson, sorry, against Baltimore.
Oh yeah. I was wondering if you guys had a Pittsburgh receiver you liked this week. I think it's Deontay Johnson, but
he's
it's
only
not a given.
5,500, and he looked pretty good last week. I'm done with Juju. Like, thank God Ryan isn't here to talk him up anymore, but I'm done with him.
No,
Yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say that the best wide receiver play on the slate is on the other side of that Pittsburgh game.
You're going to say Marquise Brown, and he's not a cash game play.
I am going to say Marquise Brown. He is probably not a cash game play, although I think you can make a case. Oh my God. So
air yards don't translate to cash game plays. We've been over this.
We have been over this, but here's my thinking on Marquise Brown, right? I'm guessing, this being a Football Guys production, that there is some overlap in the audience between our show and the Audible. And if you guys listen to Cecil and Sigmund, who are both Pittsburgh fans, you've heard them complain constantly about Pittsburgh's inability to cover receivers downfield if the pass rush doesn't get to the quarterback. So this week they're playing against Lamar Jackson, who can extend plays regardless of who the defense is. And if there's a breakdown in coverage back there, Brown is going to have the chance to slip behind that secondary. And when you look at those air yards and those advanced numbers, and you see where Brown ranks in fantasy, but not in, I don't even know where I'm going with that. Here's the point. 45% of the team's air yards. That rate trails only Terry McLaurin's 2.5 deep targets per game. That's fourth at wide receiver. And when you look at what the opposition's top perimeter receivers have done in recent weeks against Pittsburgh, you've got Travis Fulgham, huge game, 10 catches, 152 yards and a touchdown. And A.J. Brown basically replicated that receiving line last week against the Steelers. This is the Marquise Brown week, just like this is the Jonathan Taylor week.
Put them together and it's magic. John, any other receivers you'd like to mention? Maybe some other GPP plays?
Yeah, I've got some GPP plays. For what it's worth, Rashard Higgins is on my GPP list. He's not on my cash game list. He's certainly not the best play of the week.
We need a bet between AJ Green and Rashard Higgins.
We do need a bet. Let me think about what that might look like. Tyreek Hill is on my list at 6,700. I just think that this is a team that's going to score their points. And Tyreek Hill, 6,700, he's the wide receiver one for the best offense in the league. And he's going to, if he does his thing, he could get that in one fell swoop, an 80-yard touchdown. All of a sudden he's got, what is it? 17 points. Yeah, something like that. I guess that question I have, maybe I'll throw it out. I'm a little hesitant, but our projections are suggesting that Cam Newton might be in play based on his. I know. I feel the same way. However, this is a game that we know Buffalo is going to score. And Kill Harry, Damiere Byrd, they're like 3,400. There's no Julian Edelman. Is there any chance that these guys can get there? I mean,
Harry
I'm looking at Austin's face, who's the nicest guy on the show by far, and he's making faces at me. So this must be just the most idiotic thing I've said in 5 years on the show.
Harry didn't practice on Thursday due to a concussion. We'll just put that out there, and then Devin, we'll get your take.
So then it's all
Bird is
Demir
the
Bird.
only guy. Like
he might have 42 catches.
I don't mind the argument that you might play a cheap New England receiver if these guys are, Edelman's definitely out. If Harry's also out, I just don't know that Cam Newton is your play this week.
No. I wasn't. I mean, Cam Newton, he comes up pretty high on the list for what it's worth. I didn't call him out in quarterbacks for the reasons you guys already think. Right. But I'm okay with going with an ancillary receiver who's going to be on 1% of rosters when we're talking about, big, large field GPPs. These are the types of plays that are going to make a difference. If somehow, I don't know, Demir Bird gets into the end zone at 3,200 or whatever the heck he is, I could look it up. Of course, I'm looking it up now and I can't find it. But if he gets in at that level, nobody's going to have him.
He's 3,700.
3,700. If he ends up with 6 catches, 80 yards and a touchdown, what is that? That's 20 points. That's 6x value on DraftKings. I'm not asking you to get 20%, but if you get 10%, you're going to be 10 times over the field.
I think if he's the only guy, he'll get popular.
You're right, and that's what I'm getting at. Go ahead.
And I think real quick, we also have to consider that if Bird is the number one, Tre'Davious White is going to erase him because he's not very good. And I think that leaves Jacoby Myers, who filled in last week. I think that leaves him as like the Edelman-esque safety valve. So I think you might want to sprinkle in Jacoby Myers if we're going there, which I don't know is necessary.
The only way I'm doing it is
necessary.
The only way
I like the call, Phil. Go ahead.
The only way I'm doing it is if Brian Hoyer is the backup quarterback and not Jarrett Stidham. Because if Jarrett Stidham comes in the second quarter for a struggling Cam Newton, you will get like 4 completions the rest of the game. And Austin is an Auburn fan, so I apologize. Can I throw one more name out there?
I mean, I know both of those quarterbacks pretty well, so I get you.
There you go. Hunter Renfrow, I think, is interesting at 3,900. Henry Ruggs will be locked down by Denzel Ward. Renfrow will be going up against Kevin Johnson, who I don't even know who Kevin Johnson is, and I'm a Browns fan. So it's a bad situation in Cleveland as far as the secondary goes, and we've talked about Derek Carr's upside, and if I'm stacking him with a receiver, it's likely going to be Renfrow. Tyler Boyd just destroyed this team last week out of the slot, and it's a situation. T.Y. Hilton had his best game against the Browns as well. So I think that if I'm looking at a Vegas receiver, it'll be Hunter Renfrow this week.
What about Darren Waller at the tight end position?
We'll get to tight end, but I'm spending down at tight end because I want Derrick Henry and I want Josh Jacobs and other positions.
Now, could we make the same argument that you were trying to make with the Patriots, John, but make it with the Saints? I mean, Michael Thomas got in a limited practice on Thursday, but I'm not really buying that he's playing this week until it really happens. And then we got Emmanuel Sanders, who's still on the COVID list. I think there's like a no % chance he plays this week. Should we be looking at a Saints receiver for the same reasons?
I mean, you could look at Marquez Callaway, right? He makes sense at 3,400, assuming that happens. I guess the issue I have there is it's the game that I think is probably really slow paced.
Oh yeah, you were saying that. Yeah,
we know that Chicago is going to be run first. If they don't want to put Nick Foles or Trubisky if he were to come in out on Front Street, and New Orleans, all they want to do is win games, and if they can run it through Kamara, they're going to do that. So Callaway, I don't hate it. It's not one that makes me excited. I don't think he has a 100-yard upside.
Devin, before we move to tight ends, I want to ask you what your feelings are on weather. This seems to be the time of year where people start to panic a little bit. We had a little bit of snow last weekend. There's some talk of wind this weekend. Where do you land in sort of the weather debate, and how do we react well to it without overreacting to it?
Yeah, over 20, I start to get concerned. Over 25-mile-an-hour wind, I don't know if I panic, but I start to change my approach, particularly with deep air yards guys. So a Henry Ruggs or who's a deep ball threat, or a DK Metcalf or a Marquise Brown, or these deep receivers, I tend to shift the underneath and the tight ends. I don't know that the overall scoring and the overall quarterback impact changes that much, but the actual game theory and game scripting does change in that you're not completing a 30-yard, 40-yard downfield pass in 25-mile-an-hour winds. It's just not, especially if it's a headwind situation. Half the game, you're not even going to be able to throw that far. So look at the stadium, look at whether it's a headwind or a tailwind and or a crosswind. But, I mean, realistically, look at the Vegas lines, too, because if it drops more than 4 points, 3 points, I don't really care that much about. I think that's natural. If it starts to get to 4, 5, 6, that's when I start to care.
Yeah, and I think those Vegas lines can be really good indicators. And, the weather prediction on a Thursday night for a Sunday game, like it could change quite a bit between now and then. So you're not really panicking or paying too much attention to it until you get really close to game time on this. Let's go to tight ends. I don't really have any tight ends on my list to talk about. Phil, I want to hear which tight ends you like this week, and I'm pretty sure Devin's going to flash the red black eye Joe. So get that ready, Devin.
So John just mentioned Darren Waller, and I think he'd be my first look if I was playing in cash games. He's coming in $1,000 cheaper on DraftKings than Kittle and Kelsey. He's Las Vegas's wide receiver 1. He leads the team in target share, receptions, air yards, the whole deal. He's a plus-size wide receiver. The Browns linebackers and safeties have been beaten by tight ends pretty consistently this season and in most seasons that I could remember. So I think Waller's fine. And just in general, this position's gotten so ugly outside of the top guys that even in tournaments, like I think I'm just kind of, spreading most of my tight end exposure over Waller, Kittle, and Kelsey. If there's one guy that I could point to for tournaments that I think could give you some leverage, Jonnu Smith. Henry's going to be popular. We spoke about him. I think because they're playing Cincinnati, we're going to see some Tannehill, A.J. Brown stacks also. Even though Smith has that green 32nd next to his name on DraftKings because the Bengals are so bad defending tight ends, I don't think a whole lot of people are going to go his way. He's put up duds in consecutive games. He was hurt, but he did get back last week to play on 70% of the snaps. His route participation was down a little bit because the Steelers, and you need to help pass block against them, but you don't have that problem with Cincinnati, who is just getting slaughtered by opposing tight ends recently, especially over the last 3 weeks. And, Smith is a guy from an athleticism standpoint who is up there with the Kittles, Kelseys, and Wallers of the world. So if he gets the ball in his hands, I could see him having a big game.
Devin, who do you like at tight end?
If I'm going cheap, I'm going Harrison Bryant. He looked good. I mean, he's a 4th-round receiving tight end. I tweeted out before the game, and I got very much criticized that Harrison Bryant was a better play than David Njoku last week, and that worked a little bit. So I'm going back. I think that this game could be a high-scoring game. If there's wind, I mean that only helps Bryant, like I had talked about. Going down the list a little bit, Trey Burton is interesting. He's seen 5+ targets in his 3 games that he's come back. Receiving threat that we all know that Phillip Rivers likes to target. And then, I mean, what are we doing with Hunter Henry? Like, I like the idea, but it's just like, it's not happening.
John, what do you think? Are you playing a Hunter Henry or a Jonnu Smith kind of price tight end, you think, this week? Or are your builds pointing at some of those higher price tight ends?
They've named the 2 cash game plays that I have on my list. That's Darren Waller and Harrison Bryant. Depends on what your build is, 5,600, 3,200. If you've got salary left, you go higher and vice versa. In terms of Hunter Henry, I mean, look, the guy has seven targets in every game except for 1 this season. So I don't hate it. He's going up against the Broncos. It's not a bad play. He's on my GPP list. But I don't think he's cash game viable. But I'm going to agree with Phil here. This position has been really tough this year in the sense that unless it's a name brand, there's not a whole lot of sleepers, right? In my GPP list this week, I've got Hunter Henry, George Kittle, and Mark Andrews. that's where I'm going. And, there's not a whole lot. Like names like in the years past, we would talk about, oh, I think this week there's a good personnel matchup for Irv Smith or Anthony Ferkser or something like that. But it's just not happening this year. I think that this is a year where, and I don't know why or how, but it has happened in such a way that you're really, your pool of tight ends is limited to like 10 or 12 guys. And, good, bad, or otherwise, just accept it, pick your favorite guy, and move on.
Don't you think it's because there's been so much value at the wide receiver position? Like each week there seems to be we talked about 6 names that are under 4K, and we're not forced to go to the Ricky Seals-Jones or who was the Steelers tight end, Xavier Grimble, or the number. I don't even know if that was the guy that caused me to shave my head, but
No.
It was another Steeler then.
Former Charger. What was his name? He was a former Charger. That's all I can remember.
Anyway, I'll find it. But those, when we didn't have cheap options, you almost had to just punt the position. But it seems this week, each week, we're talking about 4,100, 4,200, 4,500, whether it's a wide receiver or a cheap running back that saves the day.
I mean, is it possible that DK has changed their pricing strategy on tight ends? I feel like in previous years,
think so.
No,
they've definitely done it for running backs. I mean, backup running backs this year they're all priced up.
Yeah.
Even on weeks where there's no question. And by the way, it was Ladarius Green.
That's right.
Oh yeah, that's right. All right, well, let's talk about some defenses then. Devin, I always like to get your take on defenses. You tend to spend down on them. Who are you taking a risk on this week?
I'd love to find the salary for Buffalo at 3,300 against New England. I mean, like I talked about, if Jarrett Stidham comes in, this game is a disaster.
Yeah.
I mean, he's really not. I don't know what they think they see in him, but if I'm going even further down from 3,300, I think Detroit is interesting. This is a team that's actually, they started off the year slow. Jeff Okudah was out and Desmond Trufant was out and had a number of cornerback issues. I think Coleman maybe or somebody else on that secondary was hurt. But they've been playing better. And they're still not a great team, but going up against Indianapolis, and we know Phillip Rivers' tendency, I was going to say he likes to throw interceptions, but I don't think any quarterback likes to do that. So he has a tendency to throw interceptions, and when he throws interceptions, he thinks he has a stronger arm than what he does, and it's a little out route that happens to be cut off, and it's a touchdown. So I don't know that there's a quarterback in the league who's thrown more pick sixes than Phillip Rivers throughout his career. So I could see Okudah or another player on the Lions score a touchdown here.
Phil, who do you like at defense?
I think in cash games, the Titans are set it and forget it. I tipped my hand earlier about Joe Burrow's offensive line woes, but I think that becomes a real issue for him this week since he's already getting sacked at a higher rate than any other quarterback. Sacks lead to rush throws and turnovers. We know that. And I think that's a fair price for Tennessee. In tournaments, I think it's a week where you could pay up to be contrarian. And I think that most people, when they think about doing that, will probably look to the Chiefs as, 20-something point favorites over the Jets. And I get that, but there's another defense above 4K on DraftKings that I like, and it's the Chargers, who are getting healthy, and they're playing against Drew Lock, who I think at this point has shown his true colors. He is not a good quarterback, folks. And he is one that I think we want to target with enemy defenses. And if I'm paying up to try to get leverage, I think the Chargers are the way to go.
John, what are you drinking this week, and which defense do you like?
I've got some espresso martinis, courtesy of my wife, who was kind enough to make a few for me before the show. Actually, I'm in lockstep with these guys this week in terms of their defenses. I like the Titans. I think they make a lot of sense. The going up against the Denver Broncos, the Chargers make sense. The only other defense that's on my list that hasn't been mentioned are the Rams. I mean, Aaron Donald Jalen Ramsey going up against Tua in his NFL debut with receivers that probably are lacking, and a running back that probably can't get into the end zone. Makes a lot of sense to me at 3,800. I'm not sure they're cash game viable, but for GPPs, I'm going to have a fair amount of the Rams this week, and we'll see what happens. I'm an old guy, so I'm rooting for Ryan Fitzpatrick, and the fact that he was benched last week doesn't sit well with me. So take that into account with regards to that recommendation. But I'm going against Tua this week in his NFL debut.
Let's go to stacks. Phil, I want to hear about what stacks you're playing this week. Tell us whether they're sort of a safer sort of cash plus stack, or if they're more of like a little further out there, like a deeper GPP stack.
Sure. So cash plus stack, I probably gave it away when I said I think Seattle is going to score 35 points this week, but I like the idea of Russell Wilson, either one of his receivers, run it back with McKinnon, who I like quite a bit. You could go Kittle, you could go Brandon Ayuk, who's in a great spot against that secondary. And then if we want to go a little bit further off the board, John had mentioned he liked Lamar Jackson. I had mentioned that I really like Marquise Brown. I think you put those two plays together and you got yourself a stack. And then if I was running it back with a Pittsburgh wide receiver, I think I'd actually go with Chase Claypool. I think that you could beat the Ravens corners with speed, and Claypool is the guy that could streak downfield. Tennessee really did scheme to take him away last week. I don't know that every defense that Pittsburgh goes up against is going to do the same thing. So I like a bounce back from Claypool, and I think you could just chalk out the rest of your roster from there, because those three guys will be not in too many lineups.
Devin, who you stacking?
If the wind is okay, I'm going Derek Carr, Hunter Renfrow, and Rashard Higgins, and loading up at all the rest of the positions. If both score touchdowns, you're in a tremendous spot. So, and then going a little bit off the grid, and a name that I don't know that we've mentioned all year, but Kirk Cousins, Justin Jefferson, and Davante Adams.
Yes, we have not mentioned Kirk Cousins that much. All right. Well, hope you all have a happy Halloween. Be safe out there. And thank you for listening and watching. Check out all of our content over at footballguys.com/DFS. We'll be back next Thursday morning with our Week 9 episode. On behalf of John Lee, Devin Knotts, and Phil Alexander, I'm Austin Lee saying thank you for watching and thanks for being a football guy. Be sure to check out all of our content over at footballguys.com/DFS by clicking the button in front of Devin's face. And if you'd like to subscribe to our YouTube channel, be sure to press the button that's on Phil's face. And if you want to see our latest video, click that giant box that's in front of John Lee's face. Check all that stuff out. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching.